My name is Ethan Caldwell. I am 35 years old, and until recently I believed I had built a stable, predictable life in Plano, Texas, the kind of life people point to as proof that hard work pays off. I have been married to my wife, Melissa, who is 33, for 8 years, and we have been together for 11 in total. We lived in a 4-bedroom house in Willow Creek Estates, a quiet neighborhood with trimmed lawns, identical mailboxes, and neighbors who wave politely but rarely pry. I worked as a senior project manager at a logistics firm in Frisco, managing supply chains, deadlines, and multi-million-dollar contracts, while Melissa worked in marketing for a boutique fitness brand that specialized in curated lifestyles and social media perfection. On paper, we were aligned, ambitious, and moving forward. Financially, I carried nearly everything. I paid the mortgage on our house, the utilities, both of our car insurance policies, the property taxes, the HOA fees, and almost every repair or unexpected expense that came our way. When the dishwasher broke, I handled it. When the AC struggled in August heat, I called the technician and paid the invoice. When the roof needed minor patchwork after a hailstorm, I took care of it. I never complained because I believed that was what a husband did. That stability was built quietly through responsibility and consistency. Melissa contributed her income to smaller shared expenses and her own discretionary spending, and I told myself that balance was enough. The Saturday everything shifted began like any other Texas weekend morning, humid and already warm by 9. I had been up early because our water heater had finally given out the night before, and I refused to pay an emergency weekend premium. I spent 5 hours in the garage and utility closet, replacing it myself, sweating through 2 shirts, hauling the old tank out with a borrowed dolly from our neighbor. After that, I moved straight to the backyard fence, which had partially collapsed during a recent storm. I reinforced the posts, replaced warped planks, and secured everything before the next line of weather rolled in. By noon, my hands were scraped raw. My back ached, and I felt the dull satisfaction of having protected the home I paid for and maintained. Melissa left around noon dressed for a winery day trip in Grapevine with her friends Ashley and Brooke and her sister Lauren. She wore a loose summer dress, oversized sunglasses, and the kind of effortless smile she used in her marketing photos. She kissed me lightly on the cheek, thanked me for fixing the water heater, and reminded me not to forget that we had talked about trying for a baby later that year. That conversation had felt serious, hopeful, like we were stepping into the next chapter of our lives. I remember standing in the driveway watching her SUV disappear down the street, feeling tired but grounded, convinced that we were stable, maybe not perfect but solid inside the house. The new water heater hummed quietly, the fence stood straight again, and the air conditioning pushed cool air through rooms I believe were ours in every sense of the word. I showered, cleaned up the debris in the garage, and sat down in the living room surrounded by the evidence of the life I had worked to build. At that moment, I had no reason to doubt anything. I believed we were building towards something permanent, that all the sacrifices and long hours and financial responsibility were investments in a shared future. I thought we were happy. At 5:12 p.m., I was bent over the driveway with a stiff bristle brush in my hand, scrubbing rust stains left behind by the old water heater that had sat there for years, when my phone buzzed in my pocket with the sharp, unmistakable notification sound from Instagram, and I remember wiping my hands on a rag before pulling it out because I assumed it would be something mundane, maybe a tag in a casual photo from Melissa's winery trip, maybe a story update of rolling vineyards and polished glasses, something harmless and ordinary. Instead, what I saw stopped me cold in the middle of that driveway. The photo filled the screen with bright, filtered sunlight, Melissa standing against a backdrop of vineyard rows in a silk summer dress I had not seen before, holding a wine glass delicately at chest height, her head tilted slightly back, smiling wide in a way that looked rehearsed and triumphant rather than relaxed. Her hair was styled loosely, falling over her shoulders, and there was an energy in her posture that did not match the woman who had kissed me goodbye that afternoon and reminded me about trying for a baby later that year. Beneath the photo, the caption read, "Feeling single and finally free. No compromises. No obligations. Just me." The hashtags followed in neat lowercase lines. Self-growth, independent woman, no apologies, fresh start. I read it once and felt my stomach tighten. I read it again and noticed the deliberate phrasing, the rhythm of it, the certainty. I read it a third time, then a fourth, then a fifth, as if repetition might change the words or reveal some hidden joke I was missing. There was nothing ambiguous about it, nothing playful, nothing that could be mistaken for sarcasm. The words were clean and intentional, like they had been drafted and approved before being posted. Within minutes, the comments began stacking up under the image. Ashley wrote, "About time you stopped carrying dead weight. Brooke added, "Freedom looks good on you." Lauren commented, "Proud of you for choosing yourself over mediocrity." Each comment felt like a brick landing squarely in my chest. The tone was not confused, not questioning, not surprised. They were not asking what had happened or expressing shock. They were celebrating. They were affirming something that had already been discussed, something that had clearly been decided before 5:12 p.m. I stood there in the driveway, brush still in my hand, staring at the screen while the late afternoon sun beat down on the concrete and the smell of diluted cleaner hung in the air. The water heater I had installed that morning hummed faintly inside the house. The fence I had repaired stood straight behind me. Every visible sign of my labor surrounded me, tangible proof of effort and commitment. And yet on that screen my wife had just announced to the world that she was single and finally free. I examined every detail of the post, zooming in on her expression, searching for any hint of hesitation, any sign that this was impulsive or alcohol-fueled or reckless. Instead, I saw clarity. I saw satisfaction. I saw the kind of smile someone wears when they believe they have stepped into a new chapter and are proud of it. The hashtags were not random. Self-growth implied evolution beyond something restrictive. Independent woman suggested emancipation from dependence. No apologies meant there would be no regret. Fresh start indicated closure on whatever came before. There was nothing accidental about the wording. They were not confused. They were not reacting in shock. They were celebrating something that had already been discussed, already justified, already framed as empowerment. And I realized in that moment, standing in my own driveway with rust on my hands, that whatever had changed in my marriage had changed long before 5:12 p.m., and I had been the only one unaware of it. Melissa came home around 7:30 p.m. glowing in a way that felt disconnected from the house she stepped into, her cheeks flushed from wine and sunlight, her phone still in her hand, as if the outside world mattered more than the one she had just walked back into. I was standing in the kitchen when she came through the door, the smell of vineyard perfume and sweet alcohol trailing behind her, and I kept my voice steady because I refused to let emotion dictate the first exchange. I told her I had seen the Instagram post and asked her what it meant. She barely hesitated before rolling her eyes, slipping off her sandals, and say it was just a vibe, just empowerment energy, something playful and symbolic, nothing literal. The dismissiveness in her tone felt heavier than the words themselves. I mentioned her sister's comment about me being dead weight and watched her expression shift from casual to irritated. Instead of acknowledging it, she accused me of being insecure and dramatic, of reading too much into social media, of not understanding the language of growth and independence. She said that sometimes women needed to express freedom without it being an attack on anyone, that I was choosing to feel threatened because I could not handle her evolving. The conversation felt surreal, like we were speaking two different dialects of reality. I told her the wording did not sound symbolic, and she responded that I was projecting because I was uncomfortable with her finding herself. Then she said the word that stayed with me long after she walked away to shower. She said she'd been feeling suffocated lately and needed space to remember who she was outside of marriage. Suffocated. I stood there absorbing that word as if it had weight. I thought about the mornings I left before sunrise to get to Frisco on time, the evenings I stayed late to secure contracts that ensured stability, the weekends spent fixing appliances and reinforcing fences instead of golfing or relaxing. I thought about the mortgage statements in my name, the insurance policies auto-drafted from my account, the property tax payments, the HOA dues, the constant stream of quiet financial maintenance that kept our life running smoothly. Suffocated implied pressure, restriction, control. I had never once limited her spending, her travel with friends, her career choices, her gym memberships, her branding workshops, her girls' trips. I had believed providing stability was an act of support, not confinement. After she went upstairs, I sat down at my desk and opened our financial records with precision that felt almost clinical. I reviewed 8 years of statements, transfers, mortgage amortization schedules, tax filings, insurance renewals, and repair invoices. The numbers did not argue. Over 8 years, I had contributed roughly $412,000 toward household expenses, including the mortgage principal and interest, utilities, insurance, maintenance, and taxes. Melissa had contributed about $86,000, and most of that had gone toward vacations, home decor, boutique furnishings, and aesthetic upgrades that enhanced the look of our life rather than its foundation. I had never tracked it before in a comparative way, because I believed marriage was shared effort. Not a ledger, I remembered refinancing the house shortly after we married to secure a lower interest rate, and I remembered sitting at the closing table deciding to add her name to the deed because I trusted her completely. It had not felt like a risk at the time. It felt like partnership. I believed we were building equity together, building something long-term, building toward children and anniversaries and retirement. That night, staring at the totals on my screen while the house hummed quietly around me, the word suffocated echoed in my mind with different meaning. It sounded less like oppression and more like resentment carefully nurtured behind curated smiles and filtered photos. And for the first time in 11 years, I felt the ground under my carefully constructed life begin to shift in a way that numbers alone could not stabilize. The next morning I woke up before Melissa, my body still operating on routine, despite the quiet fracture that had opened inside my head the night before. And the first thing I did was check her Instagram again, because ignoring it felt like denial. Her story was already updated, over a soft pastel background with a photo of her laughing at the winery. The caption read, "Surround yourself with people who remind you who you really are." The implication was subtle but deliberate, and the replies beneath it reinforced a narrative that had begun the evening before. Messages and comments poured in about her reclaiming independence, about stepping into power, about shedding what no longer served her. The language was consistent, almost rehearsed, as if this transformation had been building privately for months before being unveiled publicly in a single weekend. I did not confront her again that morning. Instead, I shifted into a mode that felt colder and more structured than anything I had experienced in our marriage. I scheduled a consultation with a divorce attorney in Dallas named Rachel Whitmore, a partner at a firm known for handling high asset separations with precision. I chose her intentionally after reviewing her background in community property cases and asset tracing. I wanted clarity, not emotion. I wanted facts, documentation, leverage, and foresight. Before the consultation, I began documenting everything with the same meticulous attention I applied to my logistics projects at work. I took screenshots of the Instagram post and story, capturing timestamps and visible comments. I explored our financial records from the past 8 years, organized them into folders by year, and created a detailed spreadsheet breaking down my contributions versus hers. Mortgage statements were downloaded and highlighted to show payment history and principal reduction. I retrieved the original closing documents from when I purchased a house before we married and located proof of a $60,000 down payment I had made from my personal savings prior to our union. I gathered retirement account statements, brokerage summaries, and documentation of bonuses deposited into our joint account. I printed tax returns, utility bills, HOA invoices, and repair receipts, building a chronological file that mapped our financial life from engagement to present. Texas is a community property state, and I understood clearly that assets acquired during marriage would generally be divided equally upon dissolution. I also understood that separate property, if properly documented and not commingled beyond traceability, could be preserved. The $60,000 down payment was mine before the marriage, and because I had maintained records and the refinance documentation reflected the original equity contribution, there was a defensible argument to classify that portion as separate property. The appreciation of the house since marriage would likely be subject to division, but the initial equity could potentially be shielded. I approached it like a contract negotiation, rather than an emotional event. By the time I sat in Rachel Whitmore's office on Monday morning, I was composed, carrying a binder organized with tabs and summaries. She reviewed the documentation carefully, nodding at the financial breakdown, and asking pointed questions about income disparity, property titling, and retirement contributions. There was no judgment in her tone, only calculation. We discussed grounds for filing, and she recommended citing insupportability, the Texas equivalent of no-fault divorce, as it streamlined the process and avoided unnecessary escalation. The language would reflect that the marriage had become insupportable due to discord or conflict of personalities that destroyed the legitimate ends of the marital relationship and prevented any reasonable expectation of reconciliation. By Monday afternoon, the petition was drafted. Seeing the formal language printed on legal letterhead made the situation feel final, in a way Instagram captions never could. It outlined our marriage date, our residence in Collin County, the absence of children, and the intent to dissolve the marriage. It requested equitable division of community property and confirmation of separate property where documented. I reviewed every line before signing, my signature steady despite the weight of what it represented. The stability I had built over 8 years was now being converted into case numbers and asset allocations. And while I could not control her narrative online, I could control the legal framework that would determine the outcome of everything we had constructed together. Melissa packed a suitcase Sunday night and left to stay at Ashley's condo, telling me she needed clarity and space to process everything, framing it as a temporary separation meant for reflection rather than consequence. She moved through the house with an air of indignation, as if I had already wronged her simply by reacting to what she had publicly declared. I did not argue. I did not ask her to stay. I watched her load her bags into her SUV and drive away from the four-bedroom house, whose mortgage I had paid every month without fail. The silence that followed felt less like loneliness and more like inevitability. On Tuesday morning at 9:18 a.m., she was served at Ashley's condo. Rachel had arranged for a private process server to handle it discreetly and professionally, and I received confirmation by email within minutes that service had been completed. I was sitting at my desk at work when my phone began vibrating nonstop. The first text from Melissa was a string of disbelief and anger, accusing me of betrayal, cruelty, and blindsiding her while she was trying to heal. Her sister Lauren followed with a voice memo calling me heartless and vindictive. Ashley texted that I had escalated something that could have been handled privately. Brooke chimed in with a message about how real men communicate instead of retaliate. The tone across all of them was unified outrage, as if I had violated some unspoken agreement that public declarations carried no real-world consequences. I read each message without responding. The irony was not lost on me that a public announcement of feeling single and finally free had been considered empowerment, but a legal acknowledgement of that statement was suddenly cruelty. At 10:02 a.m., after the volume of accusations reached a level that bordered on absurd, I opened Instagram and navigated back to her original post, the one that had accumulated thousands of likes and comments in less than 48 hours. I typed a single response beneath it and pressed send without hesitation. You said you felt single and free. I'm respecting that. You were served divorce papers this morning. Hope to freedom is everything you wanted. The effect was immediate and explosive. Within minutes, notifications multiplied faster than I could track them. People began screenshotting her friends' earlier insults, particularly Ashley's comment about her finally stopping carrying deadweight and Lauren's praise for choosing herself over mediocrity. The contrast between those celebratory remarks and reality of formal divorce proceedings created a shift in tone that was impossible to ignore. Ashley deleted her comment, but screenshots were already circulating in direct messages and reposted stories. Brooke attempted to clarify that everything had been taken out of context, but the original timestamps told their own story. The narrative pivoted almost instantly. What had started as a viral moment of curated empowerment began to look reckless and premature. Strangers began questioning the wisdom of announcing singlehood while still legally married. Some pointed out the financial implications of public statements in ongoing legal matters. Others criticized the performative nature of branding personal upheaval as aesthetic growth. The supportive chorus that had amplified her declaration now fragmented into confusion and commentary. My phone continued to buzz throughout the morning, but I remained silent beyond that single comment. I did not argue. I did not elaborate. The statement stood on its own. In less than 24 hours, the image of a triumphant woman reclaiming independence had collided with the tangible reality of legal dissolution, and the shift from girl power to public recklessness unfolded in real time, documented in screenshots, and preserved across feeds that could not be edited retroactively. That afternoon, Melissa came home earlier than I expected. Her expression a mixture of fury and humiliation that filled the doorway before she even spoke. And the moment the door shut behind her, she launched into accusations about how I had blindsided her, how serving divorce papers without warning was vindictive and disproportionate, how I had humiliated her in front of her friends. Her voice carried the sharp edge of someone who believed they had been wronged publicly, and I listened without interrupting until she finally paused long enough for me to respond. I told her calmly that she had blindsided our marriage in front of 600 followers, that the words single and finally free were not vague poetry, but declarations, and that once something is broadcast, so that many people it stops being private emotion and becomes public narrative. She insisted the post had been metaphorical, that it was about mindset and empowerment, not about literal marital status, and she repeated that I had taken it too seriously. I reminded her of Ashley's comment about her finally stopping carrying deadweight and Lauren praising her for choosing herself over mediocrity, and I asked why those conversations seemed to have existed weeks before the post. Her anger faltered at that point and shifted into defensiveness. She admitted she had vented to them about feeling bored and unappreciated, about feeling like life had become predictable and routine, about wanting more excitement and validation. She said she had exaggerated when talking to them because that is what friends do, because venting is dramatic by nature, because sometimes she needed to feel understood. Hearing that she had been narrating me as dead weight in private long, before narrating herself as single in public, made something inside me settle into a colder clarity. I walked to the dining table, opened my laptop, and turned it toward her. The spreadsheet filled the screen, rows and columns neatly organized with 8 years of documented contributions. I pointed to the mortgage line first, $2,940 per month. I scrolled down to utilities averaging $640 per month. I highlighted insurance premiums, maintenance costs, property taxes, HOA dues, repair invoices for the AC, the roof patch, the water heater I had replaced myself just days earlier. I showed her the totals at the bottom, the cumulative figure that represented the financial backbone of our household. I asked her when she had last logged into any of the accounts. She said quietly that she never had, that I handled that stuff, that she trusted me. She looked at the numbers as if seeing them for the first time, and tears began forming in her eyes. She said she never wanted an actual divorce, that she thought we were just going through a phase, that the post was about reclaiming identity, not ending marriage. She said she had not expected real consequences, that she assumed we would argue and then move forward. I told her that words carry consequences, especially when broadcast publicly, and that declaring yourself single while married is not symbolic in a world where contracts and assets and reputations are real. I explained that once she chose to frame our marriage as suffocating herself as free, she altered the foundation of trust that kept everything else intact. She cried openly then, saying she felt overwhelmed, that she never meant to destroy anything, that she was influenced by the encouragement of friends who amplified her feelings instead of grounding them. I stood there feeling less angry than resolute. The house around us represented years of discipline and sacrifice, not metaphor. The mortgage payment was not symbolic. The deed with both our names on it was not a vibe. I told her that I had acted in response to what she publicly affirmed, and that once something crosses from private frustration into public declaration, it stops being reversible sentiment and becomes action. During mediation, her attorney attempted to frame the situation as a lifestyle adjustment issue and formally requested temporary spousal support, arguing that Melissa needed financial assistance to maintain the standard of living she had become accustomed to during the marriage. And I remember sitting there at the polished conference table watching the argument unfold with a kind of detached focus, because the word lifestyle sounded abstract compared to the spreadsheets I had built and the payments I had made for nearly a decade. Rachel did not raise her voice or show irritation. She simply opened a folder and methodically presented Melissa's full-time income records, her salary history from the boutique fitness brand, her bonus statements, and documentation of her independent earning capacity. She emphasized that Melissa was gainfully employed, educated, and fully capable of supporting herself without court-ordered assistance, and she pointed out that there had never been children, medical dependency, or career sacrifice on Melissa's part that would justify spousal maintenance under Texas guidelines. The request was effectively neutralized within minutes, not through emotion, but through documented reality. The settlement proposal that followed was calculated and clean. We agreed to split the equity accrued in the house during the marriage, retirement contributions earned during the marital period, and our joint savings account, which held $44,000 at the time of filing. After deducting the portion classified as my separate property from the original $60,000 down payment and accounting for closing costs associated with refinancing, Melissa's total asset allocation came out to approximately $118,000. The figure was not punitive and not generous beyond statutory fairness. It reflected 8 years of shared accumulation, divided evenly where the law required, and separated where documentation allowed. I chose to keep the house. I refinanced solely in my name, removing her from the deed and the mortgage in a process that felt both procedural and symbolic. Sitting at another closing table months after the first one we signed together, I felt a quiet sense of containment rather than triumph. The house remained in Willow Creek Estates, the same trim lawns and identical mailboxes, but it was legally and financially mine alone. The payment structure adjusted slightly due to interest rates, but the responsibility was clear and singular. Melissa rented a one-bedroom apartment in Richardson for $1,050 a month. The number stood out to me because it was less than half of what I had paid monthly toward our mortgage loan, and yet it represented a shift in scale she had never experienced. A few weeks after moving, she sent me a text message that was noticeably different in tone from the anger that had characterized our earlier exchanges. She said she had not realized how expensive independence actually was, that utilities, internet, renters' insurance, groceries, and parking fees added up quickly when they were no longer abstract line items managed by someone else. There was no accusation in the message, only acknowledgement. I responded with a single sentence that summarized everything I had come to understand over the past months. I told her independence is measured in responsibility, not hashtags. I did not elaborate further. The statement did not need embellishment. The difference between curated freedom and sustained self-sufficiency had become visible in bank statements, lease agreements, and monthly obligations. The empowerment language that once echoed through comment sections had given way to rent due dates and auto-drafted bills, and the transformation from aesthetic independence to accountable adulthood unfolded quietly, without filters or applause. 3 months later, the divorce finalized without spectacle, without last-minute reversals, without courtroom theatrics, just a judge's signature converting what had once been vows into a closed-case file stamped and archived. The process that had detonated online in a matter of hours concluded quietly in a government office, where no one cared about captions, hashtags, or curated narratives. The house remained in my name. The accounts were separated, and the legal tie between us was formally dissolved. There was no dramatic final conversation, no cinematic exchange of regret, only documentation and compliance. A few days after the decree was entered, Melissa posted one final public message. I saw it only because a colleague forwarded a screenshot, knowing the history. In the post, she admitted that she confused attention with empowerment and validation with truth. She wrote that social media applause had cost her a stable marriage and that she had mistaken temporary excitement for lasting fulfillment. The tone was subdued, stripped of the triumphant language that had characterized her earlier declarations. There were no celebratory emojis, no aesthetic filters masking the gravity of what had happened. It read like a confession rather than a manifesto. When I read, I did not feel vindicated. I did not feel anger or satisfaction. I felt clarity. The emotion that had once surged through me in the driveway had been replaced by a calm understanding of how fragile stability becomes when it is measured against public approval. I did not comment. I did not respond privately. There was nothing left to say that would alter what had already been executed in court. That same week, I deleted Instagram entirely. I did not archive posts or curate a final statement. I removed the account because I no longer saw value in participating in a space where declarations outpace accountability. The absence felt immediate and clean. Evenings that had once included idle scrolling were replaced with quieter routines. I focused on rebuilding in ways that did not require audience validation. I reviewed my long-term financial plans, adjusted my retirement projections, scheduled maintenance on the house, and returned to the steady rhythm of work that had always grounded me. I learned that respect is not declared online, but proven daily in small, consistent actions that rarely receive applause. It is built in mortgage payments made on time, in repairs handled without complaint, in promises kept when no one is watching. It does not require captions or commentary to exist. Melissa wanted to feel single. I made it official. The difference between us was simple and unembellished. I understood the cost of freedom before I paid it. I evaluated the numbers, the risks, the consequences, and then acted. She only understood after the invoice arrived, when the concept of independence translated into rent payments, utility bills, and a life maintained without shared infrastructure. Freedom is not inherently noble or destructive. It is expensive. It demands ownership of outcomes. In the end, there was no winner, no viral redemption arc, just two people living with the results of their decisions. I chose to calculate before committing. She chose to announce before calculating. The law finalized what language had already fractured, and the quiet that followed was not emptiness, but equilibrium restored.